Did you know that even today, a group of people who refuse to use modern technology are living right here in the 21st century, just like they did 300 years ago? The Amish are one of the most fascinating and misunderstood communities in the world. But how did they come to be? From escaping religious persecution in Europe to carving out a unique life in America, their extraordinary journey is fascinating to say the least. So, stick around as we take you back through the history of the Amish. To understand when the first Amish communities came into existence, let's go back to the 1500s. In the 1500s, Europe was going through the Protestant Reformation when Martin Luther published a document, 95 Theses, which challenged the Catholic Church's role as an intermediary between people and God. This eventually manifested as the formation of a new group called Protestants. Among these Protestants, specifically in Northern and Central Europe, was a group called the Anabaptists. The movement began in Zurich, Switzerland, with a group of reformers led by Conrad Grebel, Felix Manz, among others, who disagreed with the views of Protestant leaders. While most Christians baptized infants, the Anabaptists believed that only adults could truly commit to following Jesus. To them, faith was a choice and not something you were born into. They also believed in a simple, separate way of life, pacifism, and a strict interpretation of the Bible, which did not mirror the views of either Catholics or the Protestants. And to no one's surprise, both Catholic and Protestant leaders saw them as a threat, and so the persecution began. Many of the Anabaptists were burned at the stake, drowned, or imprisoned for their faith. To survive, many fled to the mountains and countryside, living in secret. Then, in 1693, a Swiss Anabaptist leader named Jacob Amann became a central figure in the creation of the Amish. He felt at this period that, over time, Anabaptists had become too relaxed in their faith and practice. Amann was concerned that it was becoming more difficult to distinguish Anabaptists from the modern world around them because they had let modern conveniences and practices influence them. He felt it was important to return to a stricter adherence to the Bible. He emphasized that it was a necessity to maintain their separation from society and their commitment to the true Christian values. With a mission to display a commitment to faith and identify themselves as a separate group, he called for stricter rules and more rigid church discipline. Jacob also proposed that the communion should only be held twice a year because that would give it more solemnity and importance. He also introduced the practice of foot washing, which he believed was an act of humility, serving one another and to honor one another, taking inspiration from the example of Jesus in the New Testament. But perhaps the most controversial of his reforms was the practice of shunning, or meidung. What this essentially meant was that individuals who strayed from the faith or violated community rules, including those who engaged in sin or failed to repent, would be socially excluded from the community. He believed shunning was extremely important, as that was the only way to maintain the purity of the community and ensure that its members remained faithful. Jacob also focused on the simplicity of life. He renounced worldly things and urged his community to do the same. He believed that clothing should reflect humility and a separation from worldly vanity. In fact, he also advocated for grown-out beards for men to symbolize their commitment to humility and Christian values, instead of the clean-shaved look which reflected a more worldly appearance. While he gained a lot of popularity amongst certain individuals, many viewed his approach as radical, and not everyone in the Anabaptist movement shared the same view as Amann on his strict reformist ideals. The division was not based solely on distinct philosophies and ideas. It was largely about the divergence in lifestyle, as the Amish continued to adopt stricter rules governing their daily lives, while Mennonites often embraced more modern ways of living. Now, let's fast forward to the 1700s. As the persecution got worse in Europe, the Amish started looking for a new place to call home. In 1737, the first Amish family came to Pennsylvania, a land that promised religious freedom and fertile land. This was a turning point. In Europe, the Amish had suffered a lot of persecution, But Pennsylvania was a different chapter in their history. Pennsylvania, with a policy of religious tolerance, finally gave them a place to be able to practice their beliefs freely without any kind of intolerance. Many of the early immigrants liked the area because it was covered with rolling hills that would appear suitable for their modest and uncomplicated way of living in conformity with their value system. More Amish families followed, and they started settling down in different parts of Pennsylvania. Perhaps one of the most famous of those settlements is the one in Lancaster County, a place that was soon to become the central point of Amish life in America. With its fertile farmlands and far-off rural settings, Lancaster County offered just the right location for the Amish to establish their tightly knit communities. As the 1800s rolled around, the Amish were looking for more opportunities as their population continued to grow. They settled in states such as Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, where they formed even more tight-knit farming communities. The Amish looked for areas with open, rural landscapes that would allow them to continue living as they always had, a simplified way without any modern advancements. While many American settlers at this time were moving into cities, lured by the promise of industrialization and urban life, the Amish stuck to their rural agrarian lifestyle. Their refusal to adopt modern technologies, such as electricity, cars, and telephones, set them apart and allowed them to preserve their traditional way of life. If you're wondering how they survived with limited contact with the outside world, well, you see, their communities were designed to be self-sufficient, with family and church at the center of everything. The Amish also emphasized the importance of manual labor, because that was a way of honoring God by working hard. The Amish continued to spread throughout the United States, and their communities became increasingly isolated. But even in America, change was inevitable. Over the years, differences in the community started to emerge. The acceptability of modern advancements became a point of contention. Some Amish wanted to modernize. They wanted church buildings, simpler dress codes, and new technology. But on the other hand, others were concerned about this change, and so they pushed back, concerned that embracing too much change would lead them away from their core beliefs. This tension eventually resulted in major disagreement between the two groups. By 1865, this split finally led to the formation of another group that has defined the communities of Amish ever since. The group that held onto the more traditional and conservative ideas, like the rejection of modern technology and maintaining a simpler lifestyle, was called the Old Order Amish. The Old Order Amish remained committed to rural living, plain dress, and separation from the modern world. On the contrary, a new group emerged who had a more lenient attitude towards these restrictions in general, especially towards technology and dress codes. The New Order Amish originated during the 1960s, particularly in Ohio and Pennsylvania. While the name New Order would lead one to believe it is a more current attitude toward life, that is not necessarily true. Perhaps a more accurate description would be that they borrow from both conservative and progressive practices. An example of this would be that the New Order Amish are more relaxed about using mobile phones at home or flying in an aircraft, but still have rules in place regarding tobacco use and even courtship. The New Order Amish make up about 3% of the total Amish community, and while they differ from the old Amish in significant ways, they still retain many of the fundamental beliefs like plain dressing, horse and buggy riding, and worship in home churches. Their views on non-resistance, adult baptism, modesty, and limited use of technology are identical to those of the Old Order. The New Order Amish are also different in theological matters, with the major difference being the belief in assurance of salvation. This means that one can know with certainty whether they are saved during their lifetime. This is different from the concept of salvation that the old Amish hold. They believe there is no claim of certainty of salvation during their lifetime. Instead, they live with the hope that they will one day be accepted by God through their faithful adherence to Amish practices. Another major difference that emerged between the two groups was evangelism. It is the act of preaching. New Order Amish are often more open to this concept than the Old Order Amish, actively sharing their faith and mission through pamphlets and even engaging in international mission work. This makes them somewhat more integrated with the outside world compared to the Old Order Amish, who tend to avoid interaction with outsiders. New Order Amish communities tend to have a lower retention rate compared to the Old Order Amish, with fewer of their young people choosing to join the church later in life. This is partly due to their willingness to engage with the outside world. It makes it harder for young people to fully commit to the strict boundaries that Amish life requires. When the 90s brought newer advancements, America started to change. By this time, cars had replaced horses, electricities had lit up homes, and schools were larger than ever, but the Amish held their ground. When public schools became mandatory until the age of 18, the Amish refused, because they believed too much education could lead their children away from their faith. The matter went to the US Supreme Court in 1972. In an unexpected decision, the court ruled that Amish children could stop schooling after 8th grade to help preserve their ways. This monumental decision was received with shock by the citizens of the USA because education is a fundamental right of every child. However, despite all the criticism and pushback, the Amish have managed to keep their way of life. They have recently opened up to a few adjustments, like using gas-powered farm equipment and modern medicines, but their core beliefs remain unchanged. Today, the Amish people live in tight-knit communities and family life remains the center of their traditions. Daily chores to social situations are all heavily influenced by family, as they believe large families are a blessing of God. Children grow up learning life skills from an early age, like boys helping their fathers in field and barn work, and girls taking cooking and housework from their mothers. Schooling only extends to the 8th grade. After this, children are prepared for their future roles in society. Courtship, referred to as rumspringer, takes place once the kids turn 16. During this time, the young adults experience the openness of often remarkable freedom prior to making a choice to dedicate their lives to the faith and practice of the Amish, or leaving the community. Following courtship, marriage occurs only within the group and is part of a plain, humble wedding, typically performed among the Amish. Advancements and emerging technology continue to threaten their community, with many young adults choosing to leave. However, the Amish have remarkably managed to preserve their ways of life, even in the 21st century. What do you think? Will the Amish be able to continue their traditional practices in the coming decades, or will they be more open to advancements? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to watch more similar videos. Thanks for watching.